Donald Trump's team is getting ready to launch a new way to help his allies who've been caught up in his legal troubles. The New York Times reports Trump team is creating a legal defense fund to cover some of the legal bills involving his employees and associates. This is on top of Trump's PAC that has reportedly already spent at least $20 million on legal bills for Trump and others this year. Let's welcome Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter and tax expert David Cay Johnston. He is also a distinguished visiting lecturer at Syracuse's College of Law and wrote 3 books on Trump himself. And former Missouri Senator Claire McCaskill, we would not let her leave, so she is sticking around. Senator, you're also a former prosecutor. Here's what I need you to help me understand. These Trump allies, I'm guessing these individuals are people that the prosecution would like to flip on Trump. Is it not a massive conflict of interest that he's basically like, yo, buddies, you want me to pay your legal bills? We're talking about potentially just employees at his company who might not have a whole lot of free funds for giant legal bills.
Well, first of all, it's perfectly legal for a corporation to pay the legal bills for their employees. It's legal. Doesn't mean that it's not fraught with potential ethical problems and that it doesn't stink. We all remember Cassidy Hutchinson. When she was represented by people who wanted a certain outcome in the case, she actually shaded the truth in a deposition. And then remember, she got her own lawyer and then she came forward and said, hey, here's exactly what happened. So you can be influenced if you have lawyers who care more about the guy who's paying their bill than what happens to you. Not ethical for a lawyer to do that, but it happens. So I would, if I were ever in trouble, I would certainly want to be sure that my lawyer was only worried about me and not worried about the guy who potentially was facing the most criminal liability in the whole scheme.
David, if I were to give money to a politician, in theory, I would think, yep, it's because I want to get them reelected. It's because I care about this campaign. Do you think that the people who are donating to Trump's PAC, do you think they know or care that the money is just going to pay this guy's legal bills? A guy who touts himself super rich, and now his donors, small dollars and big, are paying his legal bills?
No, I don't think they're worried about it one bit. And, you know, the latest report from one of Trump's arms shows that they spent $108,000 on Melania's hairdresser. A little hard to connect that to the cost. It's listed, by the way, as a payment for political strategy. But, you know, it wasn't that long ago, Donald claimed to be worth over $10 billion, which if he only earned a 5% annual return means he'd have an income of over $500 million a year. And why would he need to raise money for his own or anyone else's legal defense if he had that kind of money? Of course, he doesn't.
Well, then, is there an argument to be made that this legal defense fund is the one time that Trump is actually being straight with people about where their money's going?
Well, you could make that argument. Let me suggest a new idea here. The newest defendant, Carlos de Oliveira, is someone who clearly is not a sophisticated person, not a wealthy person. Donald is paying his whatever lawyer is going to represent him. In this case, at least so far. But, you know, people could donate to a fund for him if he decides to turn state's evidence. And just like you see GoFundMe campaigns, and he wouldn't have to rely on Donald's lawyers who, as Senator McCaskill pointed out, are not likely, despite the requirements of the Professional Code of Ethics, to put the interests of this low-level employee ahead of Donald Trump's interests.
Well, Claire, what about saving face, right? Trump loves to surround himself in 24-karat gold of awesomeness. Doesn't he look cheap or chumpish that his own team is starting a legal defense fund for these guys? If he's such a baller, wouldn't he write the check himself? Just doing this and creating this appearance of conflict of interest has to be annoying or upsetting to Jack Smith.
Listen, I adore you, but I got to tell you, have you followed Donald Trump? This guy don't want to pay anybody. He doesn't want to pay pay the people who worked on his buildings in New York. He doesn't want to pay anybody. He is all about just himself. He would rather grift and skate off his donors. And by the way, Jack Smith has looked at this, whether or not has committed fraud in some of the ways that he has solicited funds, talking about a big lie and talking about how the election was stolen and whether or not there was fraudulent inducement to give him money. And, you know, if you look at the list of things that his PAC has paid for, I mean, he's right. I mean, Melania Trump won't even be seen with him, but his donors are paying for her hairstylist. That's crazy town. That's just crazy town.
David, what do you think? Claire is exactly right. Donald Trump, and it's not being insulting. He has a long history of not paying. But doesn't this make him appear so small to be going to the public? A guy who touts himself so rich, you know, rolling in it to say like, hey, open up your checkbooks and write a check for my boys here. It makes him look
well, one of the things I've learned writing about inequality in America for the last 30 years is that a lot of people can't distinguish between someone who makes $250,000 a year and $250 million a year. It's just the numbers are so big, they're meaningless to people. But I do think that politically, Trump is viable on this. Is vulnerable on this very point. Why are you raising money like this? We thought you were worth $10 billion. You're supposed to be the modern Midas. Everything you touch turns to gold. And on the other hand, the low-level employees in the Mar-a-Lago case, the documents case, which remember started out not as so much obstruction of justice as stealing national security documents and lying about the possession of them. These are not people who know where to find lawyers to represent them. They'd end up, probably opening up the yellow pages. So if there's a public interest here, it's in people finding a way to get lawyers for these low-level people who it's unlikely they had any idea that they were committing crimes. They were doing what the boss wanted.
He's a boss. He's not a supreme leader. We all have to be responsible for our own actions. Or perhaps Donald Trump would say, yeah, I'm so rich and I want to stay so rich, so I'm going to ask all you people to open your wallets. And alas, his donors do it.